Hi, this is drshantellasherman. I am a US-based historian who specializes in the American eugenics movement, women and gender studies, and all things related to race. I'm happy to join the House of Khepera today to talk a little bit about the American eugenics movement and its impact on families, Black families. Um, Eugenics is a study of better breeding, and within households, the Black family has always been considered a threat, a threat to white superiority, to white supremacy, and the idea that in order to be fit, you must be white. Whiteness means normal, it means patriotic, it means all American or all British or all Dutch. And so, as an outlier of not the exception or the rule, but an outlier to what it is to be fit and a family, the most important institution within any society is the family, and Black families have always been under threat as a result of being an outlier within that spacing. For Black families, specifically in America, the target, they became targets almost as soon as slavery ended. Now, even within slavery, there were families who attempted, under dire consequences, to stay together. And once slavery was over, there were some men who traveled the entire length and breadth of southern states looking for their wives and their children. So it is a stereotype beyond belief that Black men just abandoned their families and went in one direction and went on with their lives, or that Black women abandoned children after slavery and never went to look for them. There are Black newspapers that show that up until 1949, there were Black families still looking for relatives, right? 1949, still looking for relatives that may have been displaced following the Civil War, looking for nieces, nephews that were babies, looking for cousins or that family line so that they could reconnect them. Eugenics has been extremely pivotal in attempting to undermine the Black family on a number of different levels. In economics, first and foremost, one of the only ways that Black men could get jobs, or one of the jobs that was most prevalent following slavery, was to become a Pullman porter. A Pullman porter was a waiter who was on the newly devised train systems that were running from one coast to the next, or moving from northern cities to southern cities, or from the South into the Midwest. This meant that Black men couldn't be inside their households to defend, to protect, to actually provide for. They were paid relatively low wages, but more than obviously were received in slavery. However, that money was also pulled away from. So, in other words, the uniforms that the Pullman porters had to wear, how they slept and where they stayed, what they ate, was all deducted from their pay packets before they actually received their money. So a tallying system had to take place. But in leaving those Black men on the road, it also left the women and children extremely vulnerable to all types of terrorism created by white males. The Klan was extremely effective in shadowing Black families and keeping them from being cohesive. If Black men wanted to vote, a lot of times their wives or their children were terrorized. The women were raped, the children were harmed in ways that made these men understand that even though they had gained suffrage and they were able to vote, they did not dare cast their votes. It also meant that as the men of the house, they couldn't exercise their true authority over their households, because white men still had the ability to walk into their houses through the front door and terrorize their homes. Based upon these types of things, we can move the trajectory all the way to 2019 and understand in that same way that Black men and Black women in many instances are being taken from their families through incarceration, through drugs, through other systematic attempts to just kind of undermine the authority of parents. It means that Black men and Black women begin to trust each other less because they're not around each other enough to really solidify the unions that at the turn of the century meant, ex-enslaved, former enslaved people were still looking for one another. So you get to a point now where we don't trust each other enough to even say good morning or ask for a date, but would rather do it behind a screen or try and talk through social media or some type of dating app where you're sliding forward, backward based upon looks as opposed to things like the character of the person that you seek to be with. In undermining the union of the parents, it means that the children also are at great threat from these outside forces whose only purpose is to undermine the Black family and to ensure that these children's trajectory is retarded by crime, by violence, by a lack of access to resources, and by mental issues, by telling children that they can't do certain things because they don't have families in place. We can look at things as simple as E. Franklin Frazier, who was a wonderful social scientist, African-American male, who decided to, through the National Urban League, an organization that wanted to chart the migration of Black people from the South into ports like Chicago, New York, Detroit. He would sit in family court and listen to Black families talk about the problems that they were having in being rejoined from the South to the North as they migrated. Sometimes the fathers would go first and then send for the children, or the parents would go and then send for the children. Sometimes the women would go by themselves. When the families tried to get together all in one body again in these new cities, they found it treacherous, and they found it near to impossible to really navigate a system that did not want them there in the first place. And what E. Franklin Frazier found was that there was a systemic effort to undermine Black men by ensuring that they could not get work, but making it so that the women could get work. Or if the women got work, they had to live as work-in maids, live-in maids, which meant they were a maid in a white person's household, and they had to stay there overnight in case the white family needed them to get them a glass of milk in the middle of the night or make a sandwich or do whatever. They had to live on the property of the white person's house, inside their house, which meant they could not be home to tend to the needs of their own husbands and their children. And the white families knew full well that in me keeping this woman or this man here, who may have been a chauffeur or a gardener or whatever the case might have been, I am keeping them from being in the house with their children and with their families and doing the things that families do. This continues even into this day, where we have, again, fathers who are being separated by the military, which is very prevalent just for the money sometimes in America. Men who are going on long journeys, or they just don't stay home because maybe incarceration. It could be employment that's taking them out of the space. With women, same types of issues. But what it does is, again, it causes an undermining of the stability of the household and a lack of trust overall. In terms of efforts that we can make today to try and stymie some of the negative effects that eugenics continues to make on the Black family, it's imperative that, number one, Black men and women understand that they are not each other's enemies. It's imperative that Black men and women talk to each other and deal with each other in extremely loving terms, even if some of the love is gone. If you feel that you need therapy or whatever else, your children need to understand that there is love in a space, even when there are disagreements, when you're diametrically opposed to things, that whatever brought this union together needs to some extent still function. It is not that much of a deal. It's not that much to ask. If you can go to work every day and deal with a boss who you don't like, and in some instances hate and would love to kill, you definitely can work with the person who you've had children with to forge a plan to ensure that we have meals together once a week with our child, to ensure that he hears or she hears what we're saying to each other in loving terms. And at the same time, that child has an opportunity to see that even if we don't agree and can't live in the same space, we still love each other enough to love you the right way and to ensure that you have what you need. And I would say, finally, parents, they need to be able to talk to their children and have a space where the children are able to talk to them. Too many of our children are left to the wherewithal and the whims of people who are vicious when they know that the child does not have a system in place to guard them off from foolishness and silliness. These are not difficult things to do, but it requires a commitment from the adults, first and foremost, and then a further commitment with the children, especially if they're teenagers, that says anything that you need, the two people you come to first are your parents. If you don't feel that one of us can do it, you find another family member, and then ensure that that family member also understands that even as they interact with that child, they are always to come back to you. We don't hold confidences outside of families. So it ensures that everyone starts to work to rebuild that trust that families were always supposed to have in the first place. It means that men have some work to do, but they get to do it in a very loving and committed and special way. Because all people who get married and become families, they're not in agreement all the time. That just doesn't work like that. But they are in agreement that this is a family and we must do certain things for the protection of the unit as a whole. Then we can deal with white supremacy and racism and these other things as a united body.